If you haven't noticed yet, I really love reading classical Chinese. Modern Chinese isn't bad, but there's just something about the classical language that really captures my imagination. Well, I wasn't always this way. In fact, that should be obvious. Just look at me. I wasn't born speaking Chinese, and I certainly didn't learn how to read classical Chinese through genetics. I learned how to read these books through some hard work, but honestly, it was mostly because I became interested in them. But let me tell you the story. Back in the real old days, I only spoke English. I was mostly interested in things like video games. And, of course, I was interested in computers. Well, back in those days, I didn't really think much about learning foreign languages. Sure, I had some German classes in middle school, but this was middle school in the United States. It's not like we actually learned anything. Actually, my interest in foreign languages started when I served a church mission in Germany. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with theology or any of that mumbo-jumbo. It was actually in southern Germany that I was first seriously exposed to Chinese culture, and I embraced the Chinese world quickly. I took a few Chinese classes at university after serving the mission and wound up majoring in the language. And before long, I was able to do a study abroad trip to China and embrace everything firsthand. And that's where I got my real start with the Chinese language. I started taking classes in school, sure, but I'm going to tell you a secret about some of those classes. They really weren't as useful as you might think. Many of you who have tried to learn Chinese will recognize this series of books, Integrated Chinese. Anyway, that's the series that I started off with all those years ago. Now, it really doesn't matter what system you start out with, the basics are pretty much the basics. No matter what textbook it is, or even what language it is, the problem is the same. These books are really boring. Now, I should stop here for a second. You see, the thing that will keep you studying a language is not the money that you might be able to get if you master the language, or the prestige, or whatever. It's also not just an interest in the language. No, you need something to give you motivation, or you'll just give up. Just going to class isn't going to cut it, and you're going to get sick of the stupid dialogues and other nonsense really quickly. Well, fortunately, I was able to find that truly interesting thing in classical Chinese. This old and dusty series of books is what motivated me to keep pushing through Chinese at the start. Now, the old James Legge translations of the old classics of Chinese philosophy certainly look cool, especially with all the commentary on the bottom. The fact that these texts are pretty boring is outweighed by the fact that the characters and fonts actually do look really cool. And, since my parents didn't know the first thing about Chinese literature, I imagined at that time that it would be a lot of fun for me to just dive in and learn as much as I could to kind of show off. And, well, that was my motivation to keep trying. Now, I will admit I've got some other familial motivations as well. For example, my wife is from southern Taiwan, and we've spoken Chinese exclusively together for about 20 years now. But my point still stands. You see, there's a difference between wanting to learn enough of the spoken language to carry on a conversation and wanting to be able to read classical literature in the original. That's especially true because the classics really take a lot of time and effort. Now, I hate to break it to you guys, but those texts that James Legge translated are really boring. It might look interesting because, it's in Chinese, but honestly, this is all sleep-inducing stuff. My advice is to skip the boring philosophy and just go straight for the poetry, which is a lot more fun. If you're getting started, I recommend messing around with anthologies like this one, How to Read Chinese Poetry. You want to make sure that whatever you use has more than just like a gloss and brief explanation of the poem. In fact, the deeper that whatever book it is you use is, the more interesting that the literature will be to you. Old Chinese poetry is really cool. It's maybe not so practical, but it really is cool. It's like discovering an endless, vast world filled with all sorts of mysteries and places you've never seen before. And the best part, of course, is that it's free from all that pseudo-religious moralizing and all the arbitrary rules and requirements. Now, you can't forget about grammar, though honestly, classical Chinese grammar really is not that hard. So this book, Pulley Blank's book, is an option, and it's one of the books that I used when I started out, but I should warn you that there are some pretty embarrassing mistakes. Actually, Du's Handbook of Classical Chinese Grammar is really the best that I've ever seen. You see, these sample sentences are the secret weapon. You can easily turn these into Anki cards and really cram the grammatical concepts home in your brain. What you'll eventually understand as you learn language is that the best way to learn grammar is in context. That's something I picked up from Tae Kim's famous Guide to Learning Japanese. Tae-Kim's guide is extremely well organized and is really easy to work through, but the real key to it is his insistence on always using extensive sample sentences. But don't get carried away. You need to remember that your goal is to read whatever it is that you're interested in. If you want to read the Chinese classics, you should have a plan to read the Chinese classics. Memorizing a grammatical textbook is not reading the Chinese classics. See, if you want to read something like Journey to the West, Shioji in Chinese, you're going to need to start actually reading the book. Chances are that even the best poetry anthology isn't going to have any of these poems, and you're going to want to figure out a strategy to read them quickly so that you don't get bogged down. Now, you never want to be scared of using an English or other language translation to guide you along. In fact, it's pretty much required for some of these books, especially Journey to the West. And of course, reading some of the modern adaptations can help you visualize what's happening in the classical text, plus it's a lot of fun. What you need to remember, though, is that you'll never start reading the books you're actually interested in if you convince yourself that you have to read something else first. And it took me years to learn that lesson, believe it or not. If you find something that you really want to read, then read it. It doesn't have to be ancient or modern, doesn't really matter. And I'll tell you a secret, even if you're convinced that you don't have the linguistic skills to read it yet, just read it anyway. If you're really interested in it, you might as well start today. Remember that vocabulary, grammar, and things like that are things you can look up. It doesn't even matter what language you're talking about. So actually, Jia by Ba Jin was the first Chinese novel that I ever read. You could always go for something like that if you wanted a warm-up in somewhat early modern Chinese. Seriously though, if you're like me and you really want to read Dream of the Red Chamber, Hong Lo Meng in the original, it's best to start reading it in the original. Sure, there are some parts that are difficult, but they're probably still going to be difficult even if you wait 10 more years before you start. What you'll find out about all of these Chinese classics is that there are a bunch of other books that will help you figure out what is going on. Many of the classical novels also have old commentaries that shine light on otherwise confusing parts of the text. There's always something there to help you out. And that's generally true even for the most notorious novels. Now, if you're really lost, you can always look it up in Chinese on some place like Baidu or even Google. You'll get a lot of results. And AI chatbots, especially DeepSeek, can also be really helpful, though you have to watch out and double check because of all the hallucinations. It's actually probably easier these days to read the great classical literature of the past than has ever been before. A book like Dream of the Red Chamber was basically inaccessible to Western readers for centuries. These days, though, it can be read, and it's really not as bad as you would think. Sure, it takes some time, reading, and some self-discipline, but it can be done. Just remember, nobody is actually born knowing how to read this stuff.